And our program guest this morning is former Premier Peter Beattie. But before then, we'll see how the Sunday papers are reporting this. And Dennis Atkins, I'm right when I say that young blokes like you and I have never seen anything like this before.
No, this is one that just blows everything else out of the water. We've commented before that we keep saying I've never seen anything like this before, especially since about 2006, when politics sort of seemed to enter a very, very strange, unknown world. But this one just blows all that away. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I put that to someone in the Labor Party on Friday, and they said, "I hope so."
And you can talk through what might have gone right and wrong with the campaign, but in effect, this has been coming for a long time, surely.
Well, we've had 2 elections already in Queensland, which Labor wasn't quite sure it was going to win, and certainly in 2009 they didn't think they were going to win. So I suspect that a lot of this is the electorate making sure this time they'd really had enough of Labor last time. I suppose the parallel is probably 93, 96 federally, but with lots of bells and whistles on. That the electorate really wanted to make sure that they got rid of this government.
And Mark, we shouldn't forget, it's the great personal political story of Campbell Newman.
Yeah, look, it is amazing. Everyone was talking, as Chris was just referencing just then, the idea that Campbell Newman could, try and come into Parliament, try and come in as Premier from outside the Parliament. The idea that, for example, the LNP could win and he might not win the seat himself, and so they'd be left without a leader. It's a very bizarre sort of story, but it's as far as bold gambles go, this one's paid off spectacularly.
And Crosby Textor did some polling, Dennis, and what comes through is the unprompted reasons for their choice. 84%, parties, leaders and political behaviour. What do you think they're driving at there?
Well, this was one of the most political campaigns I've ever seen. It was the most political campaign I've ever seen. The policy didn't get a look in. It was incredibly shrill, and it got more and more shrill as the campaign went on. And this was being driven by first the negativity of Labor, and then this sort of screaming, "We're beaten, don't leave us with something, please," appeal right at the end. And I think it's interesting that 3 years ago the electorate in Queensland got very angry with the LNP because they weren't up to the job of getting rid of Labor. And so in the end, they re-elected Labor to send a message to the LNP. This time, in those last sort of 7 to 10 days, they actually got really angry with the Labor Party. They knew they were beaten, but Labor wasn't going quietly. I called it's like the last drunk at a party, and you can't get them out the door, so you end up sort of throwing them out, and I think that's what happened.
And threw most of them out. 7 are left, but one of those is Anna Bligh. What do they do for leaders now?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? That they've got a leader for every day of the week, or no leader at all, it seems. I guess there's various views about whether they could stick with Anna Bligh. I mean, obviously she's the leader at the moment, but she's just been repudiated in a fashion that Australian politics has never seen before. So, that's a sort of a pretty tough decision to make. I guess they've got some other choices, Dennis, have they?
Well, they've got a couple of choices within their 7, their netball team, but their best leadership candidates are now beaten. They got beaten on Saturday. The LNP had 3 strategic aims in this election. One was to win the general election. 2 was to win Ashgrove. Now, they got both of those really, really right, and they did them both well. Their 3rd was what they called the decapitation strategy. This is where they specifically targeted all the seats held by the next generation of Labor leadership. And I spoke to somebody in the LNP on Friday. He said, we've got them all when we're an inch away in Greenslopes. That's where Cameron Dick was beaten, and they just pushed on and they took Cameron Dick down too.
And the biggest loss was Andrew Fraser.
Absolutely. Andrew Fraser, many people think that Andrew Fraser should have been made Premier a year ago. Before the floods, Anna Bligh was very unpopular. Her ratings were about 25%. There was a lot of talk within the Labor caucus to get rid of her early in 2011. and put Andrew Fraser in as leader. But then the floods came along, she rehabilitated herself, and that strategy fell by the way.
Yeah, it has been there for a while, because I recall that in the 2010 election when they said, don't let Julia Gillard do to Australia what Anna Bligh has done to Queensland, so that sentiment was already there.
Yeah, and in the 2010 election, the bunting on all of the polling booths was photographs of Anna Bligh and Julia Gillard together. The LNP's bunting was, Anna and Julia. Get rid of both of them.
We'll talk about federal implications a little later on, but Bob Katter now, and I think got around 11% of the vote, but 20% in some places. He says that I think he'll end up at 2 seats. He said it could have been a whole lot better. Here he is.
On preferential voting, remember this is optional preferential, on compulsory preferential voting, we would win 7 seats on those figures that I've seen tonight. I may be proved wrong because I haven't had time to analyse them properly, but we would win 7 to 12 seats.
One of the key points of difference...
You take up my point. We're a very formidable force now.
Bob Katter has talked rubbish from day one, and he's talking rubbish again tonight.
But Laura, he didn't have a lot of time to prepare. Some of your candidates are only in the field for about 6 weeks, so you would expect to hear a lot from him, perhaps in the Senate, for the next federal election.
I think it's a very interesting showing, Barry. He didn't have a lot of time. This was, as we've discussed, a really polarising election. If you're going out there in a new party, you're going to be lucky to get anything when everybody's so determined to get rid of the incumbent government. He only won seats in areas where he himself sits in Kennedy, but I think he is going to be a force to be reckoned with in 18 months' time. He's shown that he can actually get people in the field, and it's worked pretty well for him.
And you'd imagine that would be particularly the case if, in fact, given this enormous wellhead of expectation about this government now and how many people they've got, if there is any sort of dissatisfaction with it, then some of that dissatisfaction, presumably, being sort of conservative in its origins, might come back to him. So.
But I think you can take Bob Katter seriously as a political force in Queensland when he starts taking votes off of the Conservatives in a big way. His vote pretty well all came from the Labor Party. He took very little vote off of the Conservatives in those seats. The Conservative primary vote was just as high as it was in the rest of the state.
But that has a bit to do with, as Laura said, the sort of hinge point election, doesn't it? I mean, this is a very polarised electorate at the moment. The voters had bigger fish to fry, which was we want to toss out this government, and they did so in the most
but One Nation
manner.
Took votes from both sides, and that's why One Nation prospered. Bob Katter needs to do that if he's going to prosper.
Now, Campbell Newman said that the victory should be taken with some humility, grace and dignity. Clive Palmer had a different view. Let's hear from him.
He's the most successful political leader in the nation's history. No one's ever got this sort of vote in any state or federal election before. And Anna Bligh is the most disastrous leader in Australia's history. No one's lost by so much as she has. God bless her. God bless everything she's done. But we'll never forgive the ALP.
Do you think 75 seats might be too many seats?
No, we should get the lot. I love Campbell Newman. I love his family. I admire his wife. I think it's fantastic how they stood by him. And the cowardice of the ALP, the gutless wonders who will now live in oblivion. Andrew Fraser, get an honest job for a change.
All right, we'll talk a little more about Clive Palmer later on. Now, Peter Beattie is coming up, and Jeff Seeney, who held the fort in the Parliament until Campbell Newman arrived, had this to say last night.
Many of the problems that she inherited were Peter Beattie's legacy, and he's the one that's escaped the judgment of the people of Queensland tonight. Not only did he escape that judgment, he hung around and turned himself into a commentator and annoyed Anna Bligh politically over a long period of time. The responsibility is not all hers. The responsibility for the devastating loss tonight also has to be borne by her predecessor, Peter Beattie, because he was the architect of many of the problems that this state now confronts.